system.
Prospect of dramatic change. Our media correspondent, Nick Higham, has been investigating, and he doesn't think so.
Hold day. Turn over.
Starts running.
Turning over.
198, take 5.
Action!
Hello, Dave. Where's Mark? No, wait a minute. No.
A grey October day in Kent, and Yorkshire Television are filming a Christmas special of the Darling Buds of May. With audiences of 18 million, it's a television ratings phenomenon.
Get away from that car!
Cut.
A second series is already in the can, a sign that Britain's indigenous television industry is flourishing.
Yes, it is. ITC. Ask the photographers to come and...
Last Wednesday, the vital facts arrived at Yorkshire's Leeds headquarters.
Hiya, fellas. This is it. This is it.
Had the company kept its licence to broadcast?
It's interesting.
And how much had they promised to pay each year?
Yorkshire Television has been awarded the licence.
Hallelujah.
The amount of Yorkshire Television cash bid was 37.7, and we've got it.
Great.
If you are not on the pitch, you can't play the game. It's not at any price, it's at a sensible price to get onto the pitch, to play the game, and we believe will be long-term big players in the business of television.
This week's announcement by the Independent Television Commission brings to an end 2 years of turmoil in ITV. The next few years could be just as unsettling. Those companies which bid high, like Yorkshire, may want to follow a very different path to those which bid low, not least in deciding what kind of regional service to provide. What's more, the wide discrepancies in the winning bids mean that after 35 years, the very survival of ITV's unique regional structure of 15 independent companies is open to question. Yet that part of the old ITV system was one which the Independent Television Commission fought hardest to preserve.
We have laid stress on the regional element in Channel 3. It's been one of the, I think, successful elements of ITV in the past. It has established a real regional identity in ITV, and one which we want to see preserved. What we wanted to do when we thought about this a year ago, or over a year ago now, was to give the existing pattern, the existing map, if you like, a chance of seeing whether it could succeed in the 1990s. We thought that was a better way of going about things than determining ourselves that under no circumstances could the 1990s sustain the present map.
Yorkshire's bid is enormous for a company with a turnover of £200 million. It may have to cut costs further. 400 studio staff have gone already, and increase income, for instance by renting out its studios or this brand new edit suite. Managing Director Clive Leach hopes that advertising revenue too will stay buoyant, despite greatly increased competition.
Currently, we take about 7% of our total revenue in regional advertising. I see that growing to around 20% in the future.
Will that growth be enough to make up for what you may lose to other commercial channels?
I don't think we'll necessarily lose in national advertising to the national channels. I'm not suggesting that for one moment. After all, we will still be the dominant channel for a very, very long while.
So the increase in regional revenue would be just cream on the coffee? That sounds rather optimistic.
No, I didn't say that. What I did say was there'll be competition, and obviously some of the competition will take a little bit of our advertising away.
Whether or not Clive Leach is right about regional income, Yorkshire will think twice about what it spends in its region. Its contributions to the cost of the network are fixed, but not the budget for regional programmes. If advertising revenue falls short, costs will have to be cut. Local news programmes like Yorkshire Television's Calendar should be safe. They pull in big audiences in the early evening, and once you've invested in a local news operation, it pays to make as much use of it as you can. But Yorkshire's other regional programmes may be under pressure. Local independent producers are feeling the squeeze already. They've been forced to use cheap local studios like this one, and they've had to step up dramatically the rate at which they make programmes, like the regional entertainment shows produced by Jeff Wilson.
2 studio days
4 shows per day, 2 shows in the afternoon, 2 in the evening. Studio audience? Can you get me studio audience? Can you organise that for me? What will that come to as a total? About 5?
Yes, about 5. Yes.
You're talking about a ceiling of under 20,000 for a half-hour show, including resources. Therefore, what you end up doing is trying to think of things one can do which take up fewer and fewer resources and fewer amounts of less and less cash to allow you to make a profit.
I must come clean and say that ITV over the last 20 years have not been particularly clever at making programmes efficiently, and we will continue to look for ways of squeezing the cost of making programmes without losing the quality.
In future, do you think viewers are going to notice a difference as a result of all this?
Yes, I do, and I don't think it's going to be for the better.
Another temptation might be to make fewer programmes than were promised in licence applications. The news may be safe, but what about regional documentaries?
Well, that's it. You're looking for a closer shot? That's right. There's a good, you can see it right up on the beach there. That's the one that's trying to pull. Yeah.
Scottish Television, a very low bidder, expects broken promises will mean fines, or worse.
I think if you break your promises, you lose the licence. And I think that you've got to work on the assumption that if there's been a broadcasting act and you've signed a contract with the Independent Television Commission, that you'll be held to that contract. I think it would be very unwise to try and organise your business in any other assumption.
If saving money on programmes isn't possible, cutting back on overheads is, by sharing costs. Yorkshire's about to rebuild its transmission suite, from which programmes and commercials are played out. The new facility could do the same job for Yorkshire's northern neighbour, Tyne Tees.
I think having 15 small companies, or 15 companies as they are now, does waste a lot of resource, and I think in the new world, with competition hotting up, I think it's important that there are associations, corporations taking place.
London Weekend's plans for its studios, now often rented to outsiders, are a striking example. Not just Sunrise, but also Carlton may move in here, offering benefits to all 3. But the biggest savings of all would come if different licensees were to merge completely. In 1994, Channel 3 companies for the first time will be liable to takeover, though the government has tried to limit the scope of this. Any of the 9 largest companies, like Yorkshire, will be allowed to take over just one of the 6 smallest, like Tyne Tees, and they'll be limited to a maximum stake of 20% in just one other large licensee. Yorkshire's already got its eyes on Tyne Tees. Last year, it bought a 20% stake in the smaller company. The two now cooperate to cover local news in York, where their transmission areas overlap. As high bidders, merger makes sense. They'll need to save every last penny of overhead and costs to pay the Treasury. But even companies which have bid low are interested in mergers.
So where does all the enormous amount of money spent on nuclear power go?
It goes in here.
And one of the lowest bidders, spitting image producer Central, doesn't just want to take over small companies. It wants to merge with large companies as well.
How are you today?
Central's managing director has been dubbed the Boris Yeltsin of ITV for his advocacy of a shake-up in the regional structure.
Oh, my goodness. Do I really look like that?
He thinks just 5 or 6 super regions will inevitably emerge by the mid-90s, in spite of the takeover rules.
The government went some way towards what we wanted, but not far enough. I'm just saying that we should continue to work for a situation where, instead of having this situation where you've got so-called large companies and so-called small companies, that a simpler rule would be, let any one company grow to the extent that it has 25% of its market.
If super regions do happen, Central's likely to be one of the first companies involved. It already sells airtime jointly with another large company, Anglia. It also owns the maximum permitted 20% of Meridian Broadcasting, the new company in the south. And Central itself is 20% owned by Carlton Communications, which has won the weekday licence in London. Anglia, Meridian and Carlton all made high cash bids. Getting into bed with a low bidder like Central would spread the burden of payments to the Treasury.
we chose to invest in Meridian, which we thought was one of the best outside bidders, and of course we're delighted that they won. So it's a start in the direction in which we wanted to go. But at the time we did that, we felt that we would only be able to justify and be allowed to have the 20% interest.
But at the end of the road, a full merger of the two companies might make sense?
I think it's, you know, as I say, I think it would be wrong for me at this point to talk about mergers and alliances with particular companies. I think, as I've said before, I think it will happen in the course of time, but I wouldn't want to get into the specifics of who with who at this time.
For the TV production business then?
Hello, Madame Thomas, bonjour.
Yeah.
I'll give you my card.
These are very good. These are brand new animations for children. Wonderful TV cards. I have worldwide TV on that too.
There's another reason altogether for being bigger. Here in Cannes, buyers and sellers from television companies around the world get together twice a year for 5 days frantic deal-making. Compared to the American and European giants, most of the British companies in this market are tiddlers. Super regions at home would have definite benefits abroad.
There are tremendous economies of scale if companies would get together, and there are signs of this. For example, here at this major market, 1 or 2 companies are sharing stands. 1 or 2 of the ITV companies have joint international arms, and I think this is more likely to happen in the future. There will be cost savings, and also there will be more financial strength to sell these powerful programs overseas.
I think that British companies ought to be allowed to have a larger size of the market to grow their home base so that they can operate more effectively on the international stage.
But size isn't enough. The programs would have to change as well. This was the hard sell, complete with dancers flown in from the South Pacific for Central's latest international co-production. It's the kind of deliberately commercial project which British producers once disdained.
Now, Noel Barber's international bestseller becomes a compelling new mini-series, The Other Side of Paradise.
I think the British, for all sorts of reasons, have been too arrogant. They have been too xenophobic. They have thought that their television was the best. They have thought that they could teach other people how to do it. I think those old attitudes of the 60s, the 70s and the 80s have got to change, and the British have got to start working with people and not demanding and insisting on creative and editorial control.
But the international market's not what the ITC thinks Channel 3 should be concerned with.
What you have to remember, I think, is that British television, whether it's the ITV system or indeed the BBC, is not actually set up as a multinational conglomerate or an organisation whose principal aim is to enter into the world markets. It's set up as a service to serve principally UK viewers.
Matt.
The ITC can't have it both ways. Yorkshire's darling Buds of May, for all its popularity, hasn't sold well abroad. It's just too English. Yet overseas sales were vital. The ITV networks paying less than the programmes cost to make, and the costs of high-quality drama can mount alarmingly.
Yes, right. Earn your lunches.
This scene's being reshot because the first version was spoiled in the labs.
I'll give you all the money I got. There you are, Mark.
In future, Yorkshire's programme-making arm may have to concentrate on cheaper productions to increase profits.
Merry Christmas. Here we go. And you, Larkin. Merry Christmas, General.
The numbers of those programs obviously will be under some pressure because inevitably the network schedule, the money for the network schedule will be aimed at the highest audience rating programs. So there will be some pressure in those areas, without a doubt.
But in an interview after last week's announcement, David Glenncross maintained there would be enough money to go on making quality programmes. And he made it clear the Commission won't compromise over the present regional structure, however inefficient.
The only thing which would seriously lead us to think about going for a change in the law would be if the whole economy of the system was so run down that it was really in a desperate condition, and that kind of merger seemed the only way out. But I think that's that I hope is a fairly distant prospect.
The ITC may be able to stop large Channel 3 companies merging, but it can't stop European predators, like the Italian Silvio Berlusconi, who's already preparing to move on Britain. Berlusconi was at Cannes, voted the market's Man of the Year. He owns all 3 of Italy's commercial networks and has interests in German, French and Spanish television too.
E lei ha risposto, aggiusta le televisioni.
Now he has Britain in his sights.
Beh, io penso che sarebbe naturalmente molto positivo per noi essere anche presenti in Inghilterra, ma è un sistema molto lontano da ciò che noi conosciamo e io credo che se lo faremo dovremo farlo con un partner locale a cui aggiungere il nostro know-how nel settore della televisione, nel settore della produzione, nel settore della pubblicità.
There are other potential predators menacing Channel 3, like Canal Plus in France and RTL, which runs 6 television channels in France, Germany and Benelux. Now, RTL's parent, CLT, wants a foothold in Britain as well. CLT's Gérard Lefebvre was part of an unsuccessful bid for Anglia Television's licence. He's still on the prowl for an opening in the UK.
We are now strongly developed in some European countries, continental countries, but we still are quite small compared with American companies, Japanese groups, and in the future we believe there will be probably 10 big companies in the world in this area, and it will be extremely difficult for a middle-sized company to survive. So we would like to reach this kind of critical size and to be large enough to be able to buy programming at a reasonable cost.
British companies are easy prey. They're small and publicly quoted. High bidders will have few resources to defend themselves. Low bidders like Central may command a high price, but they'll be very tempting.
There is a considerable concern that the corporate map in 1995 will not have a Union Jack on Channel 3 companies. And there is every possibility, unless there is widespread diversification into other markets, that British television will be perhaps dominantly controlled by European counterparts.
One thing CLT claims attracts it to ITV is the quality of British programmes.
They have been able to produce very high-quality programming, and far better programming than on continental Europe, I must say. So that's very fascinating for us to come and to learn from you.
But what would really be in store for British viewers if the Europeans invaded? This is CLT's Dutch operation. These studios are devoted to making entertainment programmes for the new commercial channels which have sprung up across Europe. For the most part, they're channels which pack their peak time schedules with game shows, soap operas and Hollywood films and series. They simply can't afford the documentaries, the low-rating programmes and the costly dramas which are typical of British television. The Europeans say we're going to have to learn from them.
Hallo, zullen we nog wat eten?
Among the tricks the Europeans have devised, international co-productions not just of expensive programmes, but of cheap ones too. This soap opera is a joint venture with the Australian producers of Neighbours. It's produced on a punishing schedule, 5 half-hour episodes every week. It's a Dutch adaptation of a series which ran for 700 episodes down under. Now it tops the ratings in Holland. Costs have been cut to the bone, but the Dutch say there's no point spending any more.
People say this is too cheap, it's too simple, because you know that the sets, it's cardboard, and sometimes at home you can see it. But if you look at the ratings, it has a market share of 45% at the time slot. It was 7 o'clock, and every day. So it means maybe they feel it's cheap, but they like it. Of course, it's a dangerous discussion, so you have to have a certain quality level. So you can't say, okay, I will keep going it down and down and down all the time. So there is a limit. I think we have reached the limit.
Oké, laten we een keer repeteren. Attentie, stilte voor repetitie en
Action.
British broadcasters fear they'll be forced onto the defensive in the 1990s.
Stop.
If the Europeans come here, then I think you'll see two cultures clashing. The tradition in British television has been to try and fight for our premium audience, which we can command quite a lot of money for from advertisers, by competing with the BBC with very high production values. And your first instinct as an outsider perhaps is to bring them down, we'll save money, we can bump the audiences up in some other way through cheaper programming or bought-in programming. I would hope that if that happens, there's a big public row about it.
I don't think that the different ethos, if you like, of commercial television as it's developed in Europe will necessarily mean that foreign investment would be unacceptable here. They would have to play by our rules in terms of the license conditions. There's no doubt about that.
They might try and drag down the whole cost of the network, but unless there's an invasion which manages to knock over the majority of our big companies quite quickly, unless there's an invasion like that, then there will be a fight.
Anyone who steps out of line could be fined or even lose their license. So long as Channel 3's finances aren't so grim, the ITC is rendered powerless. They've almost finished shooting The Darling Buds of May, hopeful that the next series will be as successful as the last. The Darling Buds is set in the 1950s, the very decade when Britain's system of television regulation was dreamt up. Now, with the Europeans at the gates, there must be a question mark over whether that system can survive into the 1990s. Retaining the regional structure may have weakened Channel 3's ability to resist commercial pressures, even though the Independent Television Commission set out to preserve the strengths of the old system. Instead, the Commission may simply have sown the seeds of future conflict.
And that's all from us for now.